So you will have to choose from the following techniques depending upon what the opposition uses. Statement of your case. There is one thing you should always claim, no matter what the opposition has said, namely that the opposition has misstated your case. No matter what the opposition has said, you should make this claim, because A, if the opposition has misstated your case because it misunderstood your case, then by implication the opposition might not be very bright. B, if the opposition has misstated your case but understands your case very well, then by implication the opposition is dishonest. C, this gives you the opportunity to restate your case, and you want to restate your case so as to reinforce in the minds of the audience what you want to discuss, to reformulate your case in order to sidestep some of the objections made, point we shall see in greater detail shortly, and finally, to give yourself a little more time before you reply. The all or nothing mistake. Since one of the major ways in which a case is attacked is to extend it to an extreme, you must be prepared to offset this kind of tactic if it is used against you. If you did not make a generalization or categorical statement, and your opponent accuses you of having done so, then reiterate the more modest case you are presenting. The appeal to ignorance. The inability to disprove your case is tantamount to a proof that it is correct. As long as nobody can show that you are absolutely mistaken, then act as if you are absolutely right. Keep harping upon the fact that some of the things you said, even if they are trivial, are right, and that the opposition cannot disprove your case. Statistics. If you used statistics, and if your opponent attacked your use of statistics in the manner we indicated, then your defense should be as follows. On the one hand, if he accuses you of not using a random, representative, or adequate sample, you counter this by asking him to define what a random sample is. He will be unable to define a random sample because no one, not even the most sophisticated statistical analyst, has been able to define a random sample. On the other hand, if your opponent attacks the use of statistics, you may provide a counterexample to show how silly that would be. Suppose there were a dread disease that did not exist among a certain portion of the population because they ate a certain food. In other words, a high statistical correlation exists between a food and the absence of a disease. Wouldn't you eat that food even though the direct connection is unknown to you? As for the charge that you either neglected or suppressed certain facts, you may make the same countercharge by introducing some facts that you had not mentioned before and turning the question on your adversary. Why didn't he mention that information? This, by the way, reinforces an earlier point we made about saving some ammunition for later instead of using everything in your initial presentation. The defense of generalizations. Your generalizations are attacked when someone tries to point out that there is an exception to them. There are three answers to this charge. First, the exception may be irrelevant to the point you are trying to make. For example, suppose you're trying to argue that there is a connection between rock music and the drug culture, and as part of your evidence, you cite cases of rock stars who are involved with drugs. You may even indicate how the lyrics of some songs and the use of drugs during performances by both performers and members of the audience is part of the scene. Your opponent may want to point out that some rock stars are not involved in the drug culture. What your opponent says is true, but perhaps still irrelevant to your generalization or to your contention that there is some kind of deep connection. Second, you may claim that the exception is not really an exception and accuse your opponent of special pleading. You argue that the grounds on which he claims to make an exception, attacks based on charges of accidents or division, are not good grounds. For example, during the 1970 trial of Black Panther leader Bobby Seale, William Sloane Coffin, the chaplain at Yale University, argued that Seale should not be tried, convicted, and punished even if he were guilty, because society had been responsible for making him a criminal. This is an exception by genetic explanation. You might argue, would Coffin want to release a Southern racist who led a lynch mob on the grounds that society, in the form of Reconstruction, had caused this man to become a kind of criminal? To argue for the genetic explanation in one case and not in the other is to be guilty of special pleading. The third defense against the charge of a hasty generalization, or the existence of an exception to your generalization, is to fall back on the wise saying that the exception proves the rule, and hope for the best. This, by the way, implies, but don't tell anyone about it, that the more exceptions there are, the better the rule is. That does sound strange. Actually, the original statement was made by Francis Bacon, and when he said it, the word proves meant test. You test a generalization by looking for exceptions. Rather than helping the generalization, the exception invalidates it. In defense of definitions, defenses can be challenged as being either too strict or too permissive in the sense of being unusual. If you are charged with taking terms too narrowly, and especially if you are charged with making your position true by definition, then reply that we must have clear thoughts. Otherwise, equivocating will be the undoing of us all. Quoting out of context. Like any other charge, this one should be denied and continually denied. Keep insisting that the words you quoted are exactly as you said they were. That is, you ignore the charge that you quoted out of context and pretend that you were charged with misquoting. Inconsistency. If you are accused of being inconsistent, deny it. Deny it. First, there may be a simple misunderstanding involved, and you can easily clear it up. Second, there may be no problem at all, and the accusation is merely an attempt on the part of the opposition to embarrass you. In this case, you should point it out and publicly chastise the opposition. Third, there may very well be an overlooked inconsistency. In this case, you should confidently move to reinterpret what you said so as to make the contradiction disappear. For example, suppose you are advocating social reform for an oppressed group of people, and you publicly argue that the oppressed must take the law into their own hands. They must use violence to get justice. You then pull out a machete and wave it while you quote Patrick Henry's famous statement, "Give me liberty or give me death." Later, when you are arrested and tried for inciting to riot, sedition, or some similar charge, you claim that you made no such inflammatory remarks, because your words were not to be taken literally. They were only political rhetoric. What you had really meant was that people should only do this if necessary or forced to, but actually at this time you really believe the conditions will allow for more moderate means of social reform. Red herring. So far we have been discussing refutations of specific charges made against your presentation. If you have successfully rebutted them, all well and good. But what happens if you feel that your defense has not been strong enough, or that there are lingering doubts in the minds of the audience? At this point, you should avoid sticking to the point. What you must do is to draw attention to a side issue where you feel particularly strong. This will give the impression that you are still in charge of the course of the discussion. There are several things to keep in mind when casting out a red herring. First, although it is a side issue, it must be related at least indirectly to the issue you are discussing. Otherwise, the audience will not accept it. When discussing astronomy, one cannot introduce as a red herring a question about the price of eggs. Second, the issue you introduce must have sufficient emotional appeal to catch attention immediately. It should be so strong that you can work it as long as you want. Third, you must make sure that you present this issue in such a way that you and the audience inevitably end up on the same side while your opponent ends up on the other side. A particularly interesting version of the red herring is to be found in the discussions concerning cures for social ills. Imagine a debate about improving the education of ghetto children, wherein side one claims that some proposal, let's call it X, is the way to solve the problem. Let us suppose further that side two attacks X on the grounds that it is inherently self-contradictory, has failed when used before, will interfere with other programs, and cost too much anyway. Side one, in defense of its proposal, introduces the following red herring. You do not really understand and sympathize with the problem. Side one then proceeds to elaborate a lengthy presentation of the problem, the horror of the ghetto, the warped lives of the children, the lack of a future, and their eventual destruction. By the end of this red herring, the audience is in tears. If the audience does not think that side two is racist, it certainly thinks side two is insensitive. Moreover, the audience will not only approve of proposal X, they would probably approve of any proposal. Why is this a red herring? The argument was about a specific proposal X to solve a particular problem. At no time was the problem itself under discussion. Side two never denied the existence of the problem. It only attacked proposal X as a way of solving the problem. Side one, which defended proposal X, never really answered the criticisms, but instead acted as if side two was denying the existence of the problem. The red herring was related, at least in content. It was highly emotional, and side one took the side it believed would be shared by the audience. Call for perfection. One possibility should never be forgotten. Your case or proposal may be a good one, but it may not be perfect. That is, there may be problems or objections to it that cannot be satisfactorily answered. This, however, does not imply that your solution is not the best available. There are times when it is necessary to admit that